Learning theory describes how students perceive, process, and retain knowledge during learning. Cognitive, emotional, and environmental influences as well as freer experience all play part in how understanding or a worldview is acquired or changed knowledge and skills retained. Good evening everyone, especially to Dr. Cruzada Madriaga. My name is Arnel, Tacusalme, your discussion for today. So research into learning is controversial as there are so many variables involved and local circumstances often make generalization precarious. However, it is important that the materials evaluator considers the finding of the learning research and decides which of the findings are convincing and applicable. So the conclusion which are convinced are that the number one is deep processing of intake is required if effective and durable learning is to take place by Clerk and Lockhart in 1972. And the second one is effective engagement and also essential for effective and durable learning. Making mental connection is a crucial aspect of the learning process. And the next one is experimental learning by Kolb and Kolb 2009. And the fifth one is the learners will only learn if they need and want to learn it they are willing to invest time and energy in the process. And the sixth one is multidimensional processing by Tomlinson and Abel 2007. And the last topic that we're going to talk about which is the materials which address the learner in an informal personal voice are more likely to facilitate learning than those which use a distant formal voice by Tomlinson in 2001. The first topic that we are going to talk about, which is the deep processing of intake, is required if effective and durable learning is to take place by Clerk and Lockhart in 1972. So the levels of processing model by Clerk and Lockhart in 1972 focuses on the depth of the processing involved in memory and predict the deeper information is processed the longer a memory trace will last. So Clerk define that as the meaningful extracted from the stimulus rather than in terms of the number of analyses performed upon it. Unlike the multi-store model, it is the non-structured approach. The basic idea is that memory is just what happens as a result of processing information. So memory is just a byproduct of the depth of processing of information, and there is no clear distinction between short-term and long-term memory. Therefore, instead of concentrating on the stories or the store structures involved like the short-term memory or long-term memory, this theory concentrates on the processes involved in the memory. We can process information in three ways under the shallow processing and deep processing. So we have the shallow processing. This takes two forms. We have the structural and phonemic processing. Shallow processing only involves maintenance, rehearsal, repetition to help us hold something in the STM or the scanning tunneling microscope. When we say STM, an imaging technique used to obtain ultra-high resolution images atomic scale without using light or electron beams and leads to fairly short-term retention of information. This is only type of rehearsal to take place within the multi-store model. Under the shallow processing, we have the structural processing. So when we say structural processing, it is the appearance, which is when we encode only the physical qualities of something like the typeface of a word or how the letters look. And we have the phonemic processing under the shallow, which is when we encode its sounds. While deep processing, this takes only one form. We have the semantic processing. When we say semantic processing, which happens when we encode the meaning of a word and relate it to similar words with similar meaning. So when we say deep processing, it involves elaboration rehearsal, which involves a more meaningful analysis like the images, thinking, association, etc. of information and leads to better recall. For example, giving word a meaning or linking them with previous knowledge. Again, levels of processing, it is the idea that the way information is encoded affects how well it is remembered. The deeper the level of processing, the easier the information is to recall. So the next one is effective engagement is also essential for effective and durable learning. So effective engagement refers how their students feels like amused, happy, proud in their respective class. So students that are engaged are interested in what they are studying and are willing to put in the effort to learn more. So higher learner engagement leads to increased course achievement and satisfaction with the learning experience. So research has demonstrated the engaging students in the learning process increases their attention and focuses motivates them to practice higher level critical thinking and promotes meaningful learning experiences. So the next one is making mental connection is crucial aspect of the learning process. So learner can expand their thinking by making connections. So learner sort and categorize objects as one way of the learning how things are connected. Making connection is just another way to describe learning how things are related to each other and how the physical world works. So the experience is the most important part of the learning process. So for learning to occur, the learners must do something with the information and reflect on the content throughout the processes or the process. To maximize the learning experience, we need to provide opportunities to reflection both in action and on action. Experimental learning is essential though not necessarily sufficient, and in particular, comprehension should come to the learner before comprehension by Kolb and Kolb 2009. So, the experimental learning cycle, Kolb's experimental learning style theory, is typically represented by four-stage learning cycle in which the learner touches all the bases or the experimental learning cycle. So we have the concrete experience. So when we say concrete experience, a new experience or situation is encountered or reinterpretation of existing experience. So when we say reflective observation of the new experience, in a particular information are any consistencies between the experience and understanding. And the abstract conceptualization, it is the reflection of give rise to new idea or a modification of an existing abstract concept. So the person has learned from their experience in this kind of learning cycle. And the last one is the active experimentation. So the learner applies their ideas to the world around them to see what happens. So that is the experimental learning cycle by Kolb and Kolb 2009. Learners will only learn if they need and want to learn if they are willing to invest time and energy in the process. So a willingness to learn is important because it allows us to learn new skills and abilities that may lead to promotes to rises. So as you gain more hands-on knowledge and advance your skill set, you'll feel more confident in your work performance, which may impress supervisor and motivate team members. So why it is important to know your students and how they learn. So understanding your students' interests will help you to provide them with quality learning opportunities by giving them the opportunity to explore areas they are interested in. For example, the environment. So they will more likely to engage with the learning process when you are talking about the environment. And the next one is multidimensional processing of intake is essential for successful learning and involves the learner creating a mental representation of the intake through such mental process as sensor imaging, especially the visualization, effective association, and the use of the inner voice by Tomlinson and Avila 2007. So we use the term mental imagery to refers to representation and the accompanying experience of the sensory information without a direct external stimulus, such as representation are recalled from memory and lead one to re-experience a version of the original stimulus are more novel combination of stimuli. So inner voice, also referred to as internal dialogue. So the inner inside your head or an inner voice, your internal monologue is the result of the center brain mechanism that causes you to hear yourself talk in your head without actually forming sound. So, the last topic that we are going to talk about which is the materials which address the learner in in an informal personal voice are more likely to facilitate learning than those which use a distant formal voice by Tomlinson 2001. So features which seems to contribute to a successful personal voice include such as aspect of the orality as the number one is informal discourse feature. So when we say informal discourse feature, the best example for this one is the constructed form, ellipsis, and informal lexis. So informal discourse, on the other hand, make use of the simple sentences and active voice mainly with personal pronouns and verbs which show feelings and opinions and attitudes, such as I think, we believe, etc. In addition, construction are frequent in formal discourse no matter if it is written or spoken. So what are the constructed forms? The constructed forms, also known as the construction in the English grammar, refers to when a word is made by combining two words together, omitting some letters and replacing them with an apostrophe. For example, aren't, are not, I am, that is. So that is the informal discourse. And we have the active rather than the passive voice. So when we say active voice means that is a sentence has subject that acts upon its verb. So when we say passive voice means that the subject is a recipient of the verb's action. Also, we have the concreteness. When we say concreteness is an aspect of communication that means being specific, definite, and true to life rather than unclear and general. So the best example from concreteness is an anecdote. When we say anecdote is a short story or account about a person or event that is typically amusing, informative, entertaining, or biographical in nature. Also, we have the inclusiveness. So when we say inclusiveness, the quality of covering or dealing with range or subject or areas, like not signaling intellectual, linguistic, or cultural superiority over the learners. Sharing experiences and opinions. So sharing experiences is most of us a very nature desire, not just by school but also for our community. So scientifically speaking, our brains are wired from uh, form social connection and emphasize with others, and most of us have had that moment when someone else's laughter make us laugh or their enthusiasm and curiosity draw us closer. So as we age, it is important to continue to seek out and create shared experiences and opinions. So whether it is when with old friends or new, those your own age or younger members of the family, take time every day to pay attention to moments for meaningful conversation, find opportunities to laugh a lot, and remember happiness is not something that happens to you, it is created by you. And the last one, sometimes including casual redundancy rather than always being concise by Tomlinson 2001. So writing consciously also involves avoiding redundancies. So redundancy is when you use more words than necessary to express something, especially words or phrases in the same sentence that mean the same thing. So many writers are guilty of violating this rule at times, especially in their daily conversation. So the assertion above can be converted into criteria for the assessment of learning materials. For example, it will be constructed such as criteria as this kind of question. So to what extent are the materials related to the ones of the learners? To what extent are the materials likely to help the learners to achieve connection with their own lives? To what extent are the materials likely to stimulate emotional engagement? And the last one is to what extent are the materials likely to promote visual imaging? Before I add my report, I'd like to leave a quote. So, happiness is not something to achieve, nor it is some magical destination. So, happiness is a part of our journey in life. It is a state of mind, a state of being that one must seek to attain, maintain, and accomplish. Throughout our lives, we will have a good times and bad times, times of joy, times of pain, such as the way of life. But this balance of pleasure and pain is one of the primary drivers. It is what allow us to become who we are for better or worse. And that's the end of my report. Remember, we don't need to be happy all the time. And here's my references. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned something today. Have a good day ahead of you.